Welcome to Topics of Today, Williamson Inc.'s continuing weekly series. My name is Matt Largent. I'm the president and CEO of Williamson Inc. We're Williamson County's Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development organization. I'm glad you're here today to talk about managing your expenses. I first want to thank AP Live for allowing us to have this great studio space for this series. If you're a business owner and need space for recording and a message to your employees in a secure location, I strongly encourage you to check out AP Live now or in the future. We continue to update our website for resources during this challenging time. It's williamsonchamber.com/coronavirus. There's some great social media follows, some great information for your employees, for your business. So again, I encourage you to check out williamsonchamber.com/coronavirus. Also want to let you know that our team is here for you in this difficult time. Please reach out to any one of our team members if there's anything we can do to help you. Also, one more thing, we are continuing to add events all the time, so make sure you go to our website and check those out. We actually had our first virtual ribbon cutting last week with over 80 participants. So again, check that out. That's our website, williamsonchamber.com. When we sent out a survey to businesses to ask how they've been impacted by the coronavirus, we got 170 responses. Number one was around small business loans, different programs that could assist them financially. Number two was actually around rent and utility relief, which is exactly where today's program came from, around managing your expenses. And I'm thrilled that we've got three panelists today. They're going to be able to have that conversation for you. We've got Eric Stuckey with the City of Franklin. We've got Brad Gibson with Middle Tennessee Electric, and finally Thomas McDaniel with Boyle Development. So we'll go ahead and start with Eric. Eric is the city administrator for the City of Franklin, a good friend of mine. And Eric, let's go to your first question. First of all, the fees for the city are wastewater, water, and stormwater. So Eric, talk to us about what some of the things the city's doing to help small businesses specifically around relief for these utilities in these challenging times.
Sure. Well, good afternoon, Matt. Good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate so much the opportunity to talk with you all, and very much appreciate all that you all are doing to keep moving and keep going during these unprecedented times. What we've done off the top is we've suspended all late fees and any fees associated with late payment. We've also suspended cutoff of utilities as well in terms of our water, wastewater, stormwater components, which is what folks pay the city for. The other element that we've worked on and that we've already implemented is we no longer charge the credit card fee. That has been completely eliminated. And I will also tell you, won't return after this crisis is over. We've completely eliminated that. We're headed in that direction already. We just sped it up with our COVID-19 response. So those are elements that help either reduce costs or provide some flexibility for you.
So I appreciate that, Eric. Have you heard from a lot of small businesses during this time, either for utility relief or just anything in general? What's the feedback that you've gotten from small business in Franklin?
Well, our biggest discussion has really been around how we work with businesses finding alternative ways to deliver their services, ways for them to keep working and operating and serving their customers. And we've really tried to, while we've been taking steps to safeguard and implemented stay-at-home orders, et cetera, we've really tried to always have an opportunity for folks, if they have creative ways to serve and reach their customers, to do so. So we continue to try to do that. We're having discussions with folks like yourself and our other partners in local government, with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, about what reopening can look like, right, and are looking at those as well. So that's really been the primary thing we've talked about. I don't know that we've had as many inquiries around the utility piece, but we are here to work with folks on those as well.
Yeah, that's great. And in the survey, we asked people to share some innovative ideas they have to obviously keep their employees safe, keep the public safe, while at the same time serving their customers. And we even created a Facebook group where we've had a lot of our members share some things they've done around innovating in these challenging times. So it's great to hear that's coming from you as well. Eric, one of the things you and I mentioned as we talked about this program was there was something around a 90-day payment plan for city utilities that you actually offered before the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about what that exactly is?
Yeah, sure. If people call us, and I'll give you the phone number, if you call our main customer service line, any of those frontline customer service representatives are empowered to work with folks on an up to 90-day payment plan to spread costs out. So they'll be able to work with you directly. If you need to go longer than that, we may need to kick that up to our chief financial officer to kind of review that if you need a longer period of time, but that is also something we'd be glad to work with you on. If you call this number, 615-794-4572, that number again, 615-794-4572, any of our customer service folks on that end, on the other end of the line, will be able to work with you on spreading those charges out over a 90-day period. And again, if you want to go beyond that, think you need to go beyond that, that's something we can talk about as well. It just may take a little more review and approval, but we have empowered frontline folks to work with you on that.
That's great. I really appreciate that, Eric, and I know the community and the business community appreciates that as well, which sort of leads into the next question. You talk about empowering the city staff to make these decisions. Maybe talk about how that works. What, from a customer service standpoint, what's the philosophy behind empowering your city staff to make some of these decisions on their own?
Well, we give them guidelines so that they work within parameters that we have. The unique component of water, wastewater, and stormwater for us is they are completely separate businesses. Tax dollars do not go into any of those services. So we do make sure that they are self-sustaining with the fees that our customers pay. And so we know that we can work within those parameters to keep people functioning and have that flexibility. We do want to be responsive, so that's why we push that authority down with those basic guidelines. And again, if you have broader needs or different needs, we'll still have that conversation and work with you, but this gives you and gives our team at least a baseline of what they can do to help folks out during this very, very unusual and challenging time.
Right, and I think, in these challenging times, you really see all the training that goes in to how city employees treat their job, treat their customers. These are the times where that comes out. The culture of organizations, whether it's the city or the company, gets manifested, and really you shine the spotlight on that during these times. So I'll just finish, Eric, with the last question on you. You've got to run, but what else would you like the business community, and specifically the small business community, to know about what the city is doing now and the plans the city has for the future to support those businesses?
Well, first and foremost, know that your city government is here for you, to serve you. We've found creative ways to work remotely, do things differently. Our services are largely available to you online 24/7. You can call us anytime during the business day. People are there. Even though City Hall is physically closed with some of the limitations we're facing these days, our services have not and will not stop. So first and foremost, we're here to help and serve. And as you look at reopening and those things, we want to hear from you on how that can happen. We know that you share with us that same desire to keep people safe, to do this right.
Right.
And so we don't think that we have a corner on the market of what that looks like, and we want to continue to learn and adapt. And that has been really the watchword to everything we've dealt with in this, like I've used the term earlier, unprecedented time, is that you try things, you learn things, you try to keep people safe.
Right.
And when something may not work quite right, you adjust and you modify your approach to try to get it right or get it closer to right. And that's still how we're looking at it and working with it. And we know this is a challenging time, and we want to be here to help support you because we know we're in this together as a community.
Great. Well, thanks, Eric, and thanks for your great leadership, the mayor's great leadership. We had a strong partnership with you before this. I know it gets even stronger through these times. So I just appreciate everything that you have done, will continue to do for this community, for our businesses. It makes me feel great knowing that you're there making sure these things happen. So thank you, Eric, for taking the time, and thanks for your leadership, too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. So, obviously from a city standpoint, you got a chance to hear what the city of Franklin is doing. I know other municipalities in Williamson County are doing the same thing. So if you have any questions or concerns, make sure you reach out to those appropriate cities if you're outside the city limits of Franklin. Something else that came up on the survey was around utility relief, which is why we wanted to have a conversation with Middle Tennessee Electric and found out exactly what they're doing around utility relief. So it's my pleasure now to welcome Brad Gibson to have this conversation around Middle Tennessee Electric. Brad, welcome. Thanks for making the time for us today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's start by talking about what exactly is the Middle Tennessee Electric service area in Williamson County.
Yeah, we serve almost the entire county, Matt. Aside from a few small areas on the north side of the county where NES serves, and then to the south side, there's a few areas where Duck River Electric and Columbia Power come into the county. But by and large, we serve all of Williamson County.
Great. So talk about some of the steps that you have taken to help small businesses with their expenses, especially around utilities, especially around, obviously, electric utility in this challenging time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're going to hear a lot of parallels to what we just heard from Eric. As a member-owned, not-for-profit electric cooperative, our focus is on continuing to sustain a high level of service for our members. And one of the things we did immediately was we suspended disconnect for non-payment. So, given the circumstances, what you're not going to have is a disconnect notice coming out should you not be able to pay your bill right now. So we're working largely in that space, but also we're encouraging folks to reach out to us because there's so many different things that we can assist them with, not just the absence of a disconnect, but what does a payment arrangement look like? We can go ahead and start talking about those things.
Okay.
But we also have access, and our members have access to a lot of information through our website where they can log on and look at very granular data and understand what consumption is still taking place at their small business.
Okay.
So while they may think, well, we closed the doors, but their water heater may still be on, their HVAC may be running.
Great.
They may have not adjust something properly. So we've got folks standing by on the phones that can really help people understand, or people can log onto our website and look at very granular information to help them consume less energy right now.
Oh, that's great. I think obviously any way that a company or small business can cut their cost in this time is incredibly important. Have you heard from many businesses around this so far when it comes to what you were talking about of making adjustments to some of their expenses?
Yeah, we have. We continue to monitor very closely how many calls, making sure that we have, people available to answer all of those. And right now, I can tell you, we've got all of our employees. The only thing that has changed is we've closed to walk-in traffic, but we've got our drive-thrus open, our call centers are open, so people can talk to folks. And we are getting phone calls. And candidly, we hope we get more phone calls. We want to hear from folks.
Right.
We're here. We're a part of the community to serve folks. And where they have questions and we can help, we want to be engaged.
I think that's great. And, Middle Tennessee Electric is known as being a great community partner. Obviously, before this all started, that continues. So what are some of the ways that you are partnering or continue to partner with the community during this pandemic, Brad?
Yep, certainly our nonprofit foundation, Sharing Change, which has donated over $10 million back to the communities we serve, is an important aspect of one of the pieces of our commitment to community as a cooperative. So that continues to just be a great avenue for grant dollars. And that board, they met today, as a matter of fact, to look at grant applications. And we encourage folks that have a 501c3 and a need for money to reach out and talk to us. Lots of information at mtemc.com about Sharing Change.
That's great.
On the energy front, though, we continue to just make sure that we're educating the consumers about opportunities to save and use less energy. Just like our members get bills, we get a bill each month from TVA, our wholesale power provider. And a lot of folks don't realize that 83 cents of every dollar we collect goes to pay that energy and transmission bill that we receive. So as a not-for-profit, we operate on very, very thin margins. We've still been getting folks calling, asking if maybe we're not going to collect, bills. And as much as we'd love to be in a position to give consideration to that, the realities are that though we've suspended disconnect, we will have to collect and pay our bills to TVA as well.
Right. Yeah, and that's the reality of this conversation. At some point, you have to, the bills come due and someone has to pay for the service, right? So if
That's
you,
right.
yeah, if you are a small business or just any size business, what steps should you take to check on the energy usage, to contact you, to talk about utility relief? What's the steps, and then what should they have in front of them if they reach out to you?
Yeah, great question. So Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., our main contact centers, you can contact us 24/7, but the folks here locally are available Monday through Friday,
Okay.
7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at 877-777-9020 if you want to speak with someone. And you can do that right away, but I'd also encourage folks to log on to mtemc.com and sign up for our online portal. That online portal collects meter information, and that meter information is made available to you as the member to look at what's happening. So at a very granular level, 15-minute interval data will show you and help you understand what maybe you thought was happening isn't what's happening. And it might be flipping a light switch. It might be turning down something that's still using energy at your facility that you don't want it to.
Right.
And certainly members that are getting bills that have a demand component. So most of us, we think about a residential or small business, we're just billed for the energy that we use. But some folks that are small businesses use enough energy that they also get a demand bill. That demand component can have a lot of expense related to it. And we've got key account folks that can be made available to help them understand that bill better, but also to make sure that they reduce their demand and don't get those demand charges as high as what they may have when they're in full production mode.
Great. Well, that's incredibly helpful. I know businesses are counting every single expense they have, and there's any way they can save money during this time. This is a great avenue. So, Brad, thank you for taking a few minutes out of your time to be with us. Thanks to everything Middle Tennessee Electric does for this community, for our organization. We greatly appreciate it, and we know you're a partner in helping businesses and our community get through these challenging times. So thanks, Brad, for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks. So we had a chance to hear both from the city of Franklin around utilities, from Brad and Middle Tennessee Electric. Now it's when we put out our survey and got the responses back, they actually number 2 issue that people mentioned was around lease and rent relief specifically. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Thomas McDaniel with Boyle Development, who's going to have a conversation on rent relief. Thomas, thanks for taking the time to be here today. I greatly appreciate it.
Pleasure. And Matt, I gotta salute your coronavirus beard. Glad I'm not the only one.
You're not the only one. Yes, this is. We'll see how long this lasts, right? But thank you for that. So
I hope your wife likes yours more than mine does.
So we received 16 survey submissions actually in one day last week, and in 6 of those, the businesses mentioned rent relief as something that would help them survive during these unprecedented times. But before we jump into your suggestions to tenants about how they approach their landlord, I want you to help to provide us some context and explain the landlord's situation and perspective. And before you do that, just want to let the audience know a live Q&A questioning is open. If you have questions you want to ask Thomas during this time, happy to do that now. So Thomas, go ahead and jump in and give us the landlord's perspective. Help us set the context.
Sure. Yeah. It's a similar situation to Brad as well. In terms of our ability to give relief to our tenants, every dollar that we receive is not a dollar that goes into the Boyle bucket. 90% of our gross receipts as a landlord are passed on either to the mortgage company or to Brad or to other operating expenses of the property. So to the extent that we do have margin, Boyle is greatly willing to help whomever we can. That said, landlords are struggling today. Mm-hmm. The way the federal government set up the tremendous aid that has been set out, I think was a very clever setup. However, that setup does not funnel the aid through the landlords. It actually funnels the aid from a ground-up basis. So the aid that has been approved is going either to individuals, number 1, or to businesses, number 2. And so landlords do hopefully benefit from that indirectly. if it helped our tenants be more able to pay their rent. But landlords are actually struggling today. And so, it is not an easy time to be a landlord. So what we're looking at, Mo, but that said, we have tenants that come to us, and the first question we have is, where's your business? Second question is, where do you stand in terms of aid? But we have tenant experiences that are all over the map,
right,
from our retail and restaurant tenants, our hospitality tenants that are decimated right now,
right,
to our office tenants that are impacted, but not as much so. And so for we, as Boyle, as a landlord, we try to create projects. The nature of our projects actually makes it a different conversation for us, in that our projects are mixed use. They are a living, breathing organism. And so the biggest focus for us right now is, how do we protect the long-term essence of our projects so that when we come out of this, the projects haven't lost what they were when we went into it.
Right. So, what we've learned through the Paycheck Protection Plan, every bank manages that a little differently, so there's no set guidelines specifically around that. And every landlord situation is different too. You mentioned specifically Boyle's situation. How does that impact how other landlords are able to help and give rent relief, just based on the way they're structured?
Yeah, great question. And I think we do look at it differently. There are a lot of landlords, if you're in a standalone building, number one, or if you are owned by an institutional corporate owner, number two, you're probably going to have a tougher conversation. You might even have a tougher time even finding a person to have a conversation. Boyle is a private owner, and our projects aren't standalone buildings. They are integrated projects. And so for us, you can have a conversation with a real person. If it's an office property, that person is me. And we'll talk to everybody about what is your situation, and we do want to protect the viability of our projects. And it's not all about preserving every dollar today for us. For us, it's about preserving the long-term viability. So there are projects where we have agreed to help tenants, certain tenants that we think are very important to help. And at the end of the day, if we dip below break even for our properties, it actually means that we, individual partners, have to contribute personally to the projects to make up that cash shortfall.
Right.
And if it makes strategic sense to do so, we are doing that right now. That's not something that comes without pain for us.
Right.
I have 4 children. We've got tuition to pay. And as I mentioned, as a landlord, business is already down. And so to compound that by having to contribute to our properties is not an easy thing to do. But we're willing to look at that if it means, if it's in the long-term best interest of the project.
Right. When we prepared for this, Thomas, you talked about the notion of investing and making decisions about investing in specific tenants. What does that mean in the context of rent relief when you make those individual decisions to invest in the long term in a tenant?
Yeah, so for the reasons I mentioned a little while ago, the concept of rent relief has been a label that's been thrown out there for about a month, but it ended up circumvented a little bit by the way the federal aid was structured. The way the aid was structured, from a bottom up, the aid is going to the tenants.
Right.
And so the hope is the vast majority of tenants are therefore able to pay their rent,
right,
and keep the ecosystem from breaking down. That said, there are some tenants that, even with the aid that's out there, may have a hard time getting by. There are a lot of restaurants with zero revenues right now. And so we have done some of the same things that Brad has mentioned, where the rent has to be paid eventually, but we have spoken to tenants and tried to prioritize those where we have our limited margin that we can help.
Okay.
And gone to, certain restaurants, for example, the hardest hit, and said, what does it take to get you through this?
Right.
And Boyle is willing to invest personally in doing that if the federal aid is not enough to get tenants there.
Okay.
We would expect the tenants to also invest alongside us in doing that.
Right.
But we have We have waived late fees. We have told tenants that cannot pay everything today. If you're a restaurant, if you're a hotel and you're on the front lines, come to us, have a dialogue. What can you pay? Let's discuss this in an open book manner. And as long as we have that dialogue, we'll figure out a solution together.
Okay, that's great. And that
really... for office tenants, on the other hand, it is a tale of two cities.
Right.
And I don't mean to say that office tenants aren't affected. Everyone is affected right now. As I mentioned, our own business is affected.
Right.
But we are counting on our office tenants to be the strength that we lean on today in order to enable us to preserve that little bit of margin we have left to devote it to our restaurants, retail, hospitality folks.
Right. Yeah, and based on the conversations we have and the proactive calls we've made to the business community, certainly it's hitting restaurants and retail first and the hardest and the deepest, and not seeing it yet with office tenants yet is being the key word. So I know the answer. I know people are asking for this. I need to ask you that question. But what kind of tenants are you seeing ask that? Are you seeing one kind of business more than the other asking for rent relief specifically?
Yeah, we, as soon as this hit and the shutdowns began, we heard from a lot of the restaurants in particular first, and the hospitality. Retail followed very quickly thereafter. Restaurants may have been down, depending on their business model, if it's a takeout capable or not. Restaurants may be down 100%. Or they may be down 70%. Retail may be down 70%. Hospitality is down tremendously, 70 or 80. And so those are the tenants we heard from first. Right. After a couple of weeks, we have heard from a handful of office tenants. You can sometimes judge the severity by the timeliness of the calls. And, if it's somebody who needs an ambulance or somebody who kind of schedules an appointment with the doctor a few weeks later, I think office tenants right now are trying to manage their expenses as best they can and pull on resources wherever possible. But I don't think it is a potential terminal situation like a lot of our retail folks have. Right. And so that's where we're trying to triage most.
Right. Right. So obviously this all leads, after we set the context and talk about who's asking, the big question is, if I'm a tenant in one of your buildings, what's the best, most constructive way to approach you to have that conversation about rent relief?
The most constructive thing is just call us. Let's just, as I mentioned, we are not an 800 number. We are not a corporate landlord that is there when things are good and you have a hard time getting through when things are bad. We are living, breathing people, and as I mentioned, if it's an office property, I handle it directly. But call us. We have some tenants that have just dropped off the radar, and if you don't pay your rent and don't call and say why or say what's going on, we can't help. And that's going to be the worst case scenario, and it's going to be just whatever is in the contract is what's going to happen, and accounting is going to start billing late fees, and that doesn't help anybody. That just compounds the problem. Right. So most important thing, no matter what your situation, just call us, and we'll try to help.
Right. Obviously, like most things in life, the communication makes all the difference. So how about some general tips, whether or not Boyle is the landlord or not? What would you recommend to tenants when they have those kind of conversations? What's important to mention? What's important not to mention? What's a way they should go about that conversation?
So if you're, let's say you're a restaurant, and you are, as I mentioned, because the federal aid is coming from the bottom up, not the top down, landlords are not getting aid. Landlords are actually hurting. So a landlord's ability to help is very limited. A landlord might have a 10% margin in good times. And so if we lose 10% of our rent, we're at break even and we're at risk of foreclosure or contributing personally. So only 10% of the rent roll is our full capability, or a landlord's full capability to help. And so a landlord, if the aid is not enough for a tenant, a landlord is going to have to make some very tough decisions and only be able to help a couple of tenants. Right. And so if you are a tenant and you're a restaurant and you think that help is warranted, What the landlord is going to be listening for in the conversation you have is, were you a contributor to this project, a creative, a beneficial contributor to the project experience? Were you that tenant coming into this? Mm-hmm. And were you healthy, and did you run a good business?
Okay.
And will you likely be that same contributor after? And it's only this gap that is the issue. And therefore, the landlord feels like it's willing to take the very finite amount of help that a landlord can provide and devote it to you. Mm-hmm. As opposed to another tenant that might have been hobbling along on a shaky wheel before, mm-hmm. and you devote your finite margin to helping that tenant, and then it still ends up not coming out the other side to be a healthy, productive contributor to the project. Landlord's got to make some really tough choices. Boyle has, we've probably got 600 tenants across the city of Nashville, and we may be able to, if you just divide our margin out by those tenants and who's asked, we might be able to help 40 tenants. Mm-hmm. So we've got to make some really tough choices, and so it's got to be the combination of who is impacted the most, but also who's most likely to come out of this as a really strong, positive operator.
Okay. So I assume people would want to present their financials, the pre-pandemic financials, to the landlord. What else should they have together before they have that conversation with the landlord? Anything else you'd suggest that they bring to that conversation?
The most important element of it is going to be where do things, the pre-financials, okay. Where do things stand in terms of your aid? How far is that aid going to go, and what are you going to deploy it to?
Whether or not you got an SBA loan, I assume? Is that right?
Right.
Okay. Or secured another financing?
SBA loan. And not only the SBA program, but the EIDL program. Okay. And there are like 3 programs that are available. And the money that you'd be coming to from the landlord is a loan as well. Okay. And it might be a loan that we have to actually personally write a check to fund if it kicks us below break even for the building. Right. And so you're coming to us asking us to personally fund something on your behalf. So that's a pretty tough ask. And so just to put yourself in that position, mm-hmm. Coming with all the things we mentioned, also coming, to show we have availed ourselves of all possible resources. And the last option for us is to come to the landlord and say, hey, landlord, can you contribute personally to this? And so also for the business owner to show how they are contributing whatever resources they have personally, to show they truly believe in it. Right. They're putting in something to a pain point before they ask the landlord to do so. Right.
Well, that's great advice, Thomas. Very specific advice, too. So have you noticed a give and take in this, and conversations you and I had preparing for this? Are you seeing tenants commit to lease extensions if they're offered this immediate relief? Has that been one tactic that's been successful for tenants to employ?
That's another great question, Matt, because, I mentioned to you that the typical request would be for a rent deferral. Okay. Which can't be granted often, number one, but can be in the most severe circumstances. But even that has to be paid back. A landlord can get value. A landlord budgets for lease renewal costs and all those kind of things. And to the extent you as a tenant are one of those tenants that expects to be healthy in the long term mm-hmm. and just needs a bridge today, if you are saying, hey, but we will commit to your property long term if you commit to us today in the short term. Right. If the tenant comes and says that to a landlord, that's a very viable conversation. Okay. For a landlord to take money that we might be budgeting 3 years from now for your lease renewal or potential departure and allocate that to an early renewal today, there's a scenario where it wouldn't even have to be structured as a lease deferral. It could be rolled in and amortized over the extension of your term. Okay. And so that could be a win-win for all parties, not just a request for a favor from the tenant.
Right. Yeah, that's great. And those are some very specific things that you can do as a tenant in preparation for that conversation. That, probably pretty touchy conversation with your landlord. But most important thing I think we can both communicate is have that conversation. Go talk to your landlord. I think that's probably the most important thing out of this. So as we kind of wrap up, Thomas, just a few more questions. The longer non-essential businesses are closed, the more requests you're likely to get. Have you thought about how to handle this as we move forward and maybe this last a few months longer?
That's a great question. This was unprecedented for us.
Right.
This hit me while I was on spring break, and none of us have known how to deal with something that hits so quickly. So we're taking one day at a time.
Right.
That said, I will say, this is a little off topic, but I have been positively surprised over the past week to 10 days to see people starting to plan for next steps. And,
right.
In the real estate world, everybody always wants to get ahead of
right.
what the next guy's thinking. And, you see that in the entire business world, really.
Sure.
And so in the minds of tenants, the wheels that I see turning are people starting to say, okay, we may open up May 1st or May 5th or whatever the day is.
Right.
If we do that and I need X, Y, or Z, I want to start that conversation a week ahead of opening up because everybody else is going to start
right.
the week that we open up.
Right.
And so everybody, that becomes a herd mentality, and people even have started those conversations today. So I've been very encouraged by people who have started calling now to position themselves for the reopening, for expansions, for the hiring that they needed to do and press pause on, and are now restarting.
Yeah.
So I'm optimistic that we're not shut down that much longer. If we are, you could say, especially for restaurants and retail and all that, it will become very difficult. I'm not sure how much more difficult it could be for them than it already has been.
Right.
But yeah, if this continues too long, it's going to be difficult for all of us to handle. But I actually am hopeful that things are going to go in the opposite direction, and then it's going to pick up quicker than we thought, and we learn how to operate with a little bit different game rules, but
right.
still operate.
Well, and I think that's the big question is if we can meet the public health criteria first, if we can have the robust testing, if we can have contact tracing, if we can do the social distancing, that certainly helps if you lead through public health. So a little off topic too, but have you thought about from a landlord standpoint, what are the safety measures you can put in place or will put in place for some of your buildings and your tenants?
There's a long list, I can tell you, and we have all become amateur epidemiologists. But within the confines of a tenant space, we have to somewhat rely on the tenant to operate safely. Mm-hmm. But everything from our cleaning products to our air cleanliness, to our janitorial frequency, to no-touch handles and pull bars on restroom doors and other doors, hand sanitizer at entrances, a lot of the same things that probably all of us are doing at our house right now.
Yeah.
We're open to anything and everything, and we actually have had a lot of tenants come to us and say, hey, we just learned about this. Would you consider it?
Right.
Say, sure, that's a pretty good idea.
Right.
So, but every day there's something new.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think in the next few days, the governor is expected to introduce guidelines for businesses as well to start planning for this process. Well, anything else you want to add, Thomas? Obviously covered a lot of ground here. You gave some very specific recommendations for tenants. But anything else that we didn't cover that you want to make sure that tenants know as they go through this difficult time?
No, other than just, I think, we're all in this together, and
right.
That's how we view it. That's how we view our projects. It's how we view the business community in Williamson County that we're all so grateful to be in.
Great. Well, Thomas, thank you for taking the time to do this. Thanks for being a great community partner. We're thrilled to have been your tenant over the last several years. We're thrilled to be your tenant moving forward in Northside McEwen. Can't wait to get to the space. So, again, Thomas, just thanks for everything you've done and continue to do for our community. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks to you guys for being such a leader in this, Matt.
Great. Thanks, Thomas. So I want to thank Eric, Brad, Thomas for making the time to have this important conversation today. Again, this was the number 2 topic that came up on the survey was around rent, utility relief, how companies can manage their expenses. I mentioned earlier there's some great innovation happening with our small business. You can check out our Facebook page to see what those are. Great stories happening in the community about what companies are able to do. So again, thank you all for being a part of this today. Check out our next topic of today. It's always Monday at 1 o'clock. And thank you for your investment in Williamson County through your investment in Williamson, Inc. And we'll leave with a message from AP Live about how they can help your business during this challenging time. Thanks again.
There will always be a need for in-person meetings and gatherings, but sometimes that's not possible.
We still need to work together as teams. We just need to do it in a new way, and we can help facilitate those conversations just all online.
We're able to offer some virtual solutions that are going to allow for that business to still take place and for those important conversations to still happen. Whether it's online polling, whether it's a digital touchscreen, whether it's a fireside chat or a panel, whatever is best going to communicate your message virtually, we can make that happen.
AP Live has been doing virtual meetings for a very long time now. We've been doing them all over the world, and that expertise and that experience is what will allow us to help you communicate your message and be collaborative as we move forward in the digital world.